Hello and welcome to Tuesday's Maths. So today we're going to start decimals. We're going to take it quite slow to start off with. We're going to recap all of place value, divide them by 10, 100, 1,000 and times them by 10, 100, 1,000. Do a little bit of rounding. Tomorrow we're going to look at converting between fractions and decimals. Thursday we're going to do adding and subtracting decimals. Friday we're going to multiply, and then next week we'll start looking at division and problem solving. Okay. Challenge number 1. I want to see if you can write down a place value grid with decimal place value in it to see how much you can remember. Okay, hopefully yours looks a little bit like this. So you've got your hundreds, tens, ones, you might even have your thousands, 10,000s, 100,000s, etc. as well. Then you've got a decimal point, and then you've got tenths, hundredths and thousandths. So tenths are our biggest decimal unit, and 10 tenths would make one whole. Then you've got hundredths. 100 hundredths would make a whole, and 10 hundredths would make 100th. And then the smallest decimal place value is thousands, and 1,000 thousandths make one whole. 10 thousandths make 100th, and 100 thousandths make a tenth. So first thing we're going to do today is we're going to look at times in by 10, 100 and 1,000. Now, the reason this works is because when we've got our place values at the top up here, each one of these is 10 times bigger than the one before it. So if you look at this with whole numbers, this might be easier to understand. A 10 is 10 times bigger than ones. You times ones by 10 to get to 10. 10 times 10 is 100. 100 times 10 would be 1,000. Okay, so every time you times by 10, you move into the next place value column. Just like when we're doing adding and subtraction in column method, there's no room to write 10, so we only write 9. As soon as we go over 10, we rename. And that's because it has to go into the next column, because 10 ones make a 10, 10 tens make 100. Well, it's exactly the same with decimals. 10 tenths make a whole. And you can see that because if I wrote 10 tenths like that, you know that that is the same as a whole, okay? So 1 tenth times 10 is 1, okay? It's one whole, because it'd be 10 tenths is the same as a whole. 100th times 10 would be equivalent to a tenth, and 1,000th times 10 would be equivalent to 100th. So if you're asked to times a decimal number by 10, all you need to do is you need to move it one place up your place value scale. So I've got 0.3, I've got 3 tenths. Well, if I times a tenth by 10, I get one whole. So if I times 3 tenths by 10, I get 3 wholes. I can put 3.0, I can have a 0 here if I want, because I can move this 0 up, but I don't have to, okay? Your answer is just 3 wholes. Okay, for our second one, we've got 0.561, and we're going to times it by 10. So times it by 10 means we move one place up our place value scale. So my 0 ones become 0 tens. We don't have to write that one in, of course. My 5 tenths becomes 5 wholes. My 600ths moves one place to become 6 tenths. And my 1,000 moves one place to be 100th. So my answer should be 5.61. So now we're going to have a look at multiplying by 100. So let's look at our whole number place value to start off with, because this is going to help us to understand it. So if I have this column, the ones column, and I times it by 100, 1 times 100 is 100. So when I'm timesing by 10, I move one place. If I'm timesing by 100, I move 2 places. Just like if I had 100th and I timesed it by 100, I moved it 2 places, I get one whole. And you can see this, if my pen works, because 100th times 100th would be 100 hundredths, which, as we know, is the same as a whole. So this time, if you are timesing by 100, you are going to move it 2 places. So my decimal point stays where it is. My 1/10 moves times by 10 to be one whole, and times by 10 again to be a 10. My 100th starts here. I've got 2 hundredths. I times it by 10. I times it by 100. So my answer would be 12. Therefore, I don't need this decimal point because it doesn't make a difference. So this time, we're now going to look at multiplying by 1,000. So if we're timesing by 10, we move one place. If we're timesing by 100, we move 2 places. So if we're timesing by 1,000, we move 3 places. Because if you times 1,000th by 1,000, you'd have 1,000 thousandths, which is the same as 1 whole. So here's my decimal number, 0.058. I'm going to move all of it 3 places up my place value scale because it gets bigger if we're multiplying. So this 0 starts here, we'll put a decimal point in, and it's going to move 1, 2, 3 places. So I've got no hundreds. My 500th starts here and moves 1, 2, 3 to be 5 tens. My 8,000ths starts here, and if I'm timesing it by 1,000, it's going to be in the ones column. 1, 2, 3. So my answer is 58. Okay, now pause your video and have a go at these. So we've got 5.8 times 10. If we're timesing by 10, we're moving it 1 place. So this is going to be 58. 3.11 times 100. So I'm going to move it 2 places. Sometimes in by 100, make it 100 times bigger. So 3 times 100 will be 300. So it's going to be 311 because that hundredths column has moved into the ones column. And then I'm going to do 0.02 times 1,000. So move it all 3 places would be 2. Now we're going to have a quick look at dividing by 10, 100 and 1,000. So if we're multiplying, we move this way. If we're dividing, we move this way because the number is going to get smaller. But it's the same principle applies. So if you're dividing by 10, you move it 1 place. If you're dividing by 100, it moves 2 places. If you're dividing by 1,000, it moves 3 places. So I'm going to divide this number by 10. So to divide 13.1 by 10, everything gets 10 times smaller. So a 10 divided by 10 will become a 1. This 3, it was in the ones column, but if you made it 10 times smaller, it's going to be 3 tenths, and this 1 tenth is going to become 1/100th, 1.31. Pause your video and have a go at these. So 3.19 divided by 10. If we're dividing by 10, it gets 1 place smaller. So this would be 0.319. This one, 11 divided by 100. So this time we're moving it 2 places. So my 1 would start here in the ones column and it would move 2 places into the hundredths column. The 110 would start in the tenths column and it would move 2 places to go into the tenths column. Right, so is my answer 11? Is 11 divided by 100 11? No, because I need to remember to put my decimal point in and my 0 in the ones column. Right, 131 divided by 1,000. So 1 divided by 1,000 would be 1,000th. 3 tens divided by 1,000 would be 3 hundredths. 100 divided by 1,000, 1, 2, 3, would be 1 tenth. Ooh, whoops. Would be 1 tenth. Don't forget my decimal point and a 0. Right, give yourself a mark if you got all of those right. So now we are confident with decimal place value, we're going to have a quick go at rounding. So I'm going to round 0.62 to the nearest whole number. So my whole number, my nearest 1, would be in this column here. So this tells me my lower value, the number I would round down to, is going to be 0. If I count up in ones, 0, 1, the number I'm going to round up to would be 1. Halfway would be 0.5. I look next door and it's a 6. I've got 6 tenths. So 6 tenths would go about here, which tells me I would round it up to 1 whole. This time I'm going to round 2.11 to the nearest whole. So the nearest whole or the nearest 1 means it's this column here. This is my lower limit on my number line. So I've got 2 wholes. If I was going to round up 2 wholes, 3 wholes. In the middle would be 2.5 because that's halfway between 2 and 3. I've got 2.11. So where would that go on my number line? Hopefully you would tell me it would go here because if it's 1 tenth, that's less than 5 tenths. So I would round it down to 2 wholes. This time I'm going to round 0.36 to the nearest tenth. So I circle my tenths column, and it's got 3 tenths in it. So this always becomes my lower limit. So down here I've got 0.3. So if I'm rounding to the nearest tenth, it's going to end in the tenths column. So this is so it's going to go up in tenths for you to work out your upper limit. So if you've got 0.3, add a tenth, it's going to be 0.4. So I look next door and it's a 6. It's 6/100ths. So if it's 6/100ths, am I going to round it up or am I going to round it down? Well, halfway would be 0.35. So hopefully you could tell me it would go about here, which means it's nearer to 0.4 than it is to 0.3. So my answer would be 0.4. So this one, we've got 2.18 and we're going to round it to the nearest tenth. So again, I circle my tenths column. There it is. I've got 1/10. So this becomes my lower limit. So 2.1 is what we might round down to. So if it's going up in tenths, here is 2.1. So this is going to be 2.2. I then look next door because that's going to tell me whether I'm closer to 2.1 or 2.2, and it's an 8. So halfway would be 2.15. So 2.18 would go up here, which tells me that it's closer to 2.2. So I round it up. Now pause your video and have a go at these. You're rounding all of these numbers to the nearest 1. So for my first one, I'm round to the nearest 1. So the 4 is in my ones column. So if I draw a small number line, this tells me it's going to round to either 4 or 5. I look next door and I've got 1/10. So 5 or more, let it soar. 4 or less, let it rest. 1 is really close to 4, so I would round it down to 4. 3.17. 3 is my whole, so my number line, I'm either going to round it down to 3 or up to 4. I look next door. And again, it's a 1, so it's going to go here. So again, I'm rounding down to 3. Just because you've got a 7 in the hundredths column, it doesn't matter. You don't look at that. You just look at the number next door. Right, this next one's a bit different because now we've got tens in the tens column. So 12.05. I'm still rounding to the nearest 1. So I circle this number here, circle these 2 ones. So at one end of my number line, I'm going to have 12. The other end of my number line, I'm going to have 13. Now, I look next door and it's a 0. Right, well, in that case then, that makes it really easy because that's definitely less than 5. So it's just going to stay at 12. And for the last one, I've now got 100 in the hundreds column, but it doesn't matter because I still circle my ones column. So here I've got 118. At the other end of my number line, I've got 119. So I'm still going up in ones. I look next door and it's a 6. So a 6 is more than 5, it's more than halfway, so I'm going to round up to 119. Okay, have a go at these questions. Pause the video and then we'll go through the answers. Okay, so this time we're rounding to the nearest tenth. So I circle my tenths column, I've got 1/10. So here at one end of my number line, I've got 1.1. The other one, going in tenths this time, so it's going to be 1.2. So we've got one more tenth. Halfway would be 1.15. I look next door and it's a 2. It's less than 5. It's less than halfway. So I'm going to round it down to 1.1. Next one, I circle my tenths column, 4.68. So here's going to be 4.6. Add on a tenth, this one's going to be 4.7. I look next door and it's 8. It's 8 in the hundredths column. So 8 is more than halfway. So I'm going to round it up to 4.7. Next one, I circle my tenths column and it's a 0. So here I've got 13.0 or 13. The other end of my number line, I've got 13.1. I look next door and it's a 5, right, straight in the middle. So if it's 4 or less, you let it rest. And if it's 5 or more, you let it soar. If it's 5 or more, you round it up. So it's 5. It's exactly halfway, which means we round it up to 13.1. Well done for today. You've worked really hard. I will see you tomorrow. Bye.